Perfect.
Hi, welcome to the podcast, Dr. Burgess.
Hey, thank you for having me.
To introduce you to the audience, who do you say you are?
So, Dr. Derrick Burgess.
Awesome. And how did you become a doctor?
So, the road to being a doctor, it's a long road. I started off in probably high school with the thought of being a doctor, but the requirements to become a doctor required me to go to undergraduate for 4 years and then medical school for 4 years. And that's when you officially become a doctor. But in order to practice medicine in the United States, you have to finish a residency. So I did a 5-year residency in orthopedic surgery, and that's where you learn the art of being a surgeon. And then I did one additional year of training to become a sports medicine physician. So a lot of training, all in all, there's about 15 years of training.
Man. And I guess what sparked your interest in high school to say, I want to be a doctor? Because I guess you hear kids say that, like doctor, firefighter, police officer, but then like not many have a chance to follow through on it or decide to follow through once the going gets tough.
Yeah. So, uh, you know, at first I always liked math and science. And I had a family physician, Dr. Wayne Stanley, that allowed me to shadow him. And he actually mentored me and a small group of students, of high school students, about careers in medicine so we could understand what it is to be a doctor. I had an unfortunate injury during my football career in high school that allowed me to have, well, that I had to see an orthopedic surgeon for that injury.
Mhm.
And I expressed interest at that time that I was interested in medicine. And Dr. John Young, who later became a mentor of mine, welcomed me into his practice to actually see what he does day in and day out, to go into the operating room with him, which gave me a real life view of what it is to be an orthopedic surgeon. So those relationships, plus many relationships along the way, great mentors, helped me achieve, what could have just been a dream.
Awesome. And with all the 15 years of training now, like how long have you been able to actually practice on your own?
So I'm going into now my 10th year of being an orthopedic surgeon.
Man, it's a long career.
So it's a long career just to get started. So, it's one of the few careers that we talk about delayed gratification many times because you're typically in your early 30s before you get your first real job.
Mhm.
And then, if you work another 30-year career, most of your friends are already retired. So that's one thing, you see people that you grow up with start to have families, start to their careers, and they're taking vacations, and you're studying and just trying to get there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And for me, I guess to introduce myself to you, I studied civil engineering. So I got a bachelor's degree in civil engineering. Now I'm studying soils in that one of the 5 disciplines of civil engineering. And it'll be 10 years come December, just practicing this and doing podcasting on the side, but learning to really have a mastery of it. And it's weird, like starting a new job within the last 2 years, but still being in the same vein. It feels like I'm actually like starting in my career for myself.
Sure, sure. And that feeling can be very uncomfortable, just starting in a new surrounding, even though you're still in the same profession. But
Mhm.
that's one way that you continue to grow, I feel.
Yeah, for sure. And to your point, I think it makes sense to me why I see more doctors that are older because everyone's like constantly having this thought of like, oh, I'm going to retire, retire, retire. And I think someone like my brother shared with me and I think my siblings, or there's 3 of us boys, and he shared it between the 3 of us that there's something to be said about not really putting a retirement date on and just continuing to work in something and finding the enjoyment in your work, because then it keeps you fresh. To your point, it's that relearning and allowing yourself to recreate. It allows you to actually develop as a person to where you're not looking for that end line, that end goal. When it comes, but you're not like, okay, I retired 6 months, you pass away, because it was like you finally reached the pinnacle of what you thought you would reach.
Yeah, I think many times your career evolves and it changes as you get closer to that finish line, things change. And I think there's going to be many different phases to my career. There's going to be, parts where it's heavy into the operative part of orthopedics, but then, you can transition to a teaching phase or to another phase. So I'm interested to just see what the career is because it's different from when you're starting, you have one thing in mind, but as you go along the training process and go along jobs and interviews, it really evolves right in front of your face day to day.
That's awesome. And during this process, have you changed like locations or career tracks within or being a surgeon?
Yeah, so similar to what you were saying, I'm about 2 months on a new job. So
Mm.
at a large teaching institution, which is completely different from the community practice that I had before. So the patient care aspect is very similar. However, the work dynamics are completely different. So, and then you have to learn new relationships or form new relationships and learn new leadership and different things of that nature. So it always keeps you on your toes.
Gotcha. How's your bedside manner?
That's one thing that I take pride in is really trying to relate to the patient and really, because it's different when it's one thing to be a provider,
Mhm.
but if you can put yourself in the patient's shoes, I feel like that gives a whole different vibe because it's tough to be a patient and nobody typically chooses to be an orthopedic patient,
Mm.
especially not in the trauma world or in the sports medicine world where your career could be altered by an injury and really many people want to skip the steps of being injured and just
Mm.
get back to being well and back to what they love to do.
I guess what's something of solace that you give a patient when they first come in or they just feel like their life's over and they don't know if they're ever going to be the same again.
Yeah, so one thing I try to do is allow the patient to understand, look, I understand, I've been an athlete, I know how bad you want to continue with your career, and just really acceptance of the fact that we have this injury now,
Mm.
we can get through this injury. However, I want you to just accept that you're injured and know that I have your back. I want the best for you. And really just take some time to really accept it, whether it's crying, screaming, yelling, grieving, whatever it needs to be. Let's get that behind us and then let's meet back up so we can start the road to recovery.
That's awesome. I like that. It's almost like you're a therapist for them in a way, or you're really that guide and a coach in in the operation room in the hospital.
Yeah, no, psychology definitely is a large part of what I do, especially for injured athletes.
Mm. Was that something you knew coming in, or yet even considered would be a part of being a doctor?
Not really. That's something that you really learn as you evolve in the practice of medicine.
Mm. I like it.
Because you spend so much time during the actual formal training of just learning facts and learning techniques.
Mm.
But the personal part about it is something that you really evolve with. And that's why they call it the practice of medicine, I feel.
That makes sense. And I guess there's something to be said about having those soft transferable skills, whether it's in having a conversation like this or having a conversation where you're hands on in a different way and having to just problem solve differently.
Yeah, no, definitely. You got to be able to adjust and got to be able to be fluid. And, every day is not going to be someone's best day, but you have to be, as a provider, there and be strong for them, even when they might not be able to be strong for themselves.
Gotcha. Um, I'm curious, how did you make time to have a family life or to even form a family as you're going through the process of like, okay, I'm going to become a doctor and like this is the track that I want to take?
Yeah, I think one thing you learn about on this long track is that life goes on. You see people around you get married early. You see people around you have children, and we have to many times put that on the side as we go through training.
Mhm.
But you learn to prioritize. You learn to allot time for things that are important. Because this career could overtake your life, truthfully, and if you allow it to. So you have to learn time management skills. I felt that some of the people that were the most focused during my training were the people that had families and kids because you knew that you had an allotted time to get your studying done or to get whatever outside task, because when you walk through the door, your children are very demanding
Mhm.
of your time. And I wanted to be present. So you have to learn to adjust to that.
Gotcha. And that's something you've been able to do.
Yeah. I mean, I have a family with 3 kids. So
Wow,
I do my best. I'm not always present for everything, but they know that if I have the ability to be there, that I'm trying to be at whatever activities that they have. So
that's awesome. And like I'd mentioned earlier, how I came to learn of you was through a mutual friend, Jonathan Jones, and
yeah.
trying to get podcasters to cross pollinate and just speak to one another and seeing what each one's up to. So, how did you get into podcasting?
So during the pandemic, early in the pandemic, 2020, it's something that I've been thinking about. I love mentoring. I love talking to people and having discussions about career and life. I try to do that with my patients as well, but I'm really in a confined time slot where I have to make a diagnosis, treat the patient. So mentoring is something that I try to squeeze in, but I don't have a lot of time. And I found that I was having these same conversations about career development, about success, about financial literacy.
Mm.
And I wanted to be able to have a larger platform to do that. And with COVID, one of the first podcast episodes that I had was actually a COVID-19 town hall meeting, so to speak, where I invited other physicians and we were able to share meaningful information to the community from a trusted source. So that really got my fire kind of going. I was invited to be in a podcast competition, and I didn't even know what a trailer was at that point, but I threw it out there and I actually made it as a finalist in that. So it gave me confidence, a small victory to know that it was something that I could do. And I just took it from there and enrolled in a course. Jonathan Jones, as you mentioned, was one of my podcast mentors. And, here we are 2 years later.
That's awesome. It's like taking the initiative with what you had at hand and being able to make something of that.
Yes, I had no formal training in communications, podcasting, radio, anything like that. It's just something that I took the initiative and went towards the goal.
Gotcha. I guess what have you enjoyed about it so far, and like what's something you've kind of played with?
Sure. So I'd say probably the thing that I've enjoyed the most is connection with people and collaboration with people, that you never would have known exists, like yourself, in this podcast space. So I think that that's kind of the hidden jewel of podcasting.
Mm, I like it. Yeah, people for sure are very interesting, and
Yeah.
it's like you can talk to anyone for maybe 5 minutes, and they'll open your mind up to something you didn't even know was real.
Sure. And that's one thing I say about podcasts. I feel that I can learn from anyone if you open your mind up to learn, no matter if they're an athlete, a physician, an entrepreneur, a lawyer, whatever. I feel that I can learn something from each person.
I like it. And with your logo, I like how'd you come up with it?
So that was part of my training course that we had to come up with a logo. Um, There's life sports and medicine just kind of
Mm,
came to me. I did a lot of brainstorming. And as you can see, my logo is a physician wearing a referee's outfit, standing on a football. So that I felt that kind of came together. It just came to me in the middle of the night, to be
yeah,
honest.
I like it. And you're like, time out, time
Yeah, yeah,
out.
yeah. Right. Signaling timeout. So there you go. Because this is not about medicine. That's why I think the timeout piece is so big. I am an orthopedic surgeon,
Mm,
but so much more than that. And it took a while to really realize. At first, I'm, going to work and people say, "Hey, I heard you had a podcast." I'm like, "Yeah, I got a podcast." Just don't tell anybody. But because it takes a while to be comfortable, number one, with hearing your voice and allowing
yeah.
people to sharing your thoughts with people. So I wanted the podcast to grow, but I didn't even really want people to know that I was a podcaster. And it sounded almost like a fraud to say I'm a podcaster. Yeah, I'm a
Mm,
physician, but I'm a podcaster as well. So it evolves over time with really being comfortable in your own skin and
mm,
knowing that what you're doing, you're trying to benefit other people through it and,
yeah.
just really going from there.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely identify with that because for me, I started my podcast months before the pandemic in 2019, and I traveled over to Puerto Rico for a job with FEMA as like kind of support, and they
Mm,
have this orientation class where you get in and everybody's like, "Oh, share something interesting about you," and I was like, "I have a podcast," and people are like, "Oh, you got a podcast? You got a podcast?" And it's like, "What's it about? What's it about?" And I'm like,
yeah.
"Uh." I don't want to say,
Right.
but it's
Right.
like just
Yeah.
like that instant shock of like, oh crap, I put it to be public, but now it's public, and then like, I don't know how I feel about that.
And I think part of that, the shock of, just putting it into the universe, and it's not perfect. You know that you made mistakes. And that's one thing a lot of people that I even train with in the podcast group focus so much on everything being perfect that you get paralyzed and not able to release it. And you keep pushing back the release date. Or
Yeah,
you have this interview and oh, he said, I used to try to chase down every and every, pause and trying to make it sound perfect, but that can be exhausting as well. Now my
yeah,
editing is minimal
mm,
because and I, the fear of people doing lives, but I think it's liberating in a sense because once it's live, it's out there.
right,
No matter how many mistakes you made, it's out there, and you're able to just do it and move on to the next thing. And that's one thing that podcasting's really taught me. Sometimes, I've had the microphone sitting right in front of me and not even have it plugged into the computer,
mm,
and a remote, microphone was recording,
yeah,
so the quality might not be the greatest, but the content's still there. So you just learn that mistakes are going to happen. You try to not allow them to happen more than once and just move on.
yeah. Those are, I mean, those are great life lessons because it's like to your point, in doing what you do, there's no redo, there's no like reset button. They're like, oh, let's run it again. It's like,
Yeah,
nah, it's like you
sure,
do your
sure.
best with what you got.
And that helps take a lot of the stress. I tell myself, look, nobody's life is at risk with this podcast.
Mm,
If it goes great, great. If not, then we'll do it again next week.
yeah. Has podcasting informed your ability to practice, like especially being 2 months into this new work?
Say it one more time.
Has what you've learned from podcasting in 2 years informed what you're doing now, being 2 months in a new location, working with new people?
Yeah, I think that, now when I meet people, I'm always kind of thinking about the backstory behind how they got to where they are. I feel that it helps me meet people and
Mm,
have discussions about just whatever topic it may be better. I feel that it's helped me be a better speaker.
mm,
It helps me with processing things. It's so many steps and remaining organized. Now I know, hey, I'm a sports medicine physician. Football season is my busy time. So I try to do more interviews in this time of the season because I
mm.
know September, October are going to be really busy for me. So I feel
Right.
that skills learned in podcasting just continues to help in daily life. Yeah.
Yeah. Man, that's awesome. I heard it said that if you want something done, give it to someone that's busy or someone that's occupied because they always have a way of just getting it done because they have an idea of what they need done, what they have on their plate, and where to put new things that come into play.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel one thing and another lesson learned from podcasting is the marketing and branding
Mm,
of your podcast, which is truly yourself. So at one point in my career, I always relied on whatever company or organization I was with to brand me or to podcast me. But now I realize that I am the brand truly. And
mm,
no matter what job I'm on, I'm still, Derrick Burgess, MD, the sports doctor. That's going to
mm.
be me in whatever city or state I'm in. So that allows me to promote myself as well.
That's awesome. I like that. And like, is that something that came quickly or it kind of unfolded over the 15 years over the podcasting time to where you're like, oh, this is me. I'm not just like rehearsing. I'm not repeating what I rehearsed, but I've actually lived this and this is my identity. There's more to just like what you see, but I'm comfortable in my own skin now.
Yeah, I definitely feel like the podcast was a large part of that growth,
Mm,
and hearing stories and sharing stories. And, the more that I'm interviewed, the more that I relate more to myself,
mm,
because as I start to hear these stories, as I say them out loud, it allows me to realize that, I'm a unique individual. There's no other Derrick Burgess MDs out there. And if they are the same name, they're not the same person. So
Mm.
being my authentic self, I feel, getting behind this microphone week in and week out, I learn more about myself.
That's awesome. And I know you mentioned you do recordings live, and at least being able to take away that stress to another level to just be like, hey, one take, you go through it, and then that's it. You don't have to go back and like clip this, clip that. It's like, nope, just put it out.
Yeah, that was actually a goal of mine during my second year. I definitely didn't do that in the beginning
Mm.
because it's more paralyzed by the thought of making a mistake. But as I evolved to do that, I think I did my first live interview on someone else's show, and I was like, that wasn't too bad.
Mm.
Plus the fact that it's done.
Yeah,
So, that gave me the courage to do it on my own podcast as well.
that's awesome. And do you have any favorites that you follow or anything that you like to listen to?
Yeah, so I listen to a lot of podcasts about mindset, also about real estate.
Mm.
Uh, so Jonathan Jones, as you mentioned, he has several podcasts now. Um, One of my first podcast mentors was Dr. Nee Darko with Docs Outside the Box, where he's talking about physicians who do things other than just go and practice. So he
Mm.
talks about the business of medicine. He talks about being an entrepreneur. And then, of course, some of the other podcasts, Inky Johnson, I like his podcast with talking about mindset, and Dr. Eric Thomas, I'm a fan
Mm.
of his podcast. And then, I listen to a lot of other podcasts, but probably not as routine.
Yeah, I definitely rock with Inky. From
Yeah.
time to time, I'll look at the his Instagram and the Sharon is it Serendipity
Serendipity
podcast.
podcast.
Yeah,
Yep.
and a lot of those messages just kind of stand out to me to where I'm like, okay, I can reflect on this and save it for later, or just come back, or even if I'm scrolling, I can be like, oh yeah, that that's a word right there.
Yeah.
It seemed like a what do you call it? Kind of like a happy marriage when I saw him doing the Pivot podcast and they were kind of going back and forth between the four of them. And I was like, that's good synergy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something to the synergy of having other hosts, which
Mm.
is something that I've also thought about as well. Is probably easier in a way
Mm.
because you're not just relying on yourself, but also one thing with me is the scheduling of that, which could be a little more difficult. But I definitely think that there's something to having other people in that live conversation that helps build, you know, something that it's hard to generate on your own.
Right, right, for sure. And I think I've maybe done, as of yesterday, maybe I've only done two interviews where it's had three people in it. And
Hmm.
initially I was like, wait, how am I going to balance this? But to your point, it helps if you have someone else there that you can bounce an idea off of. And it's like you're passing, I guess it's like you're passing the ball around. If you're playing catch, okay, I throw it to you, he throws it to me, throws it to this person. And like, as long as you stay engaged, it continues the flow.
Yeah, no, I agree.
That's awesome. And what's um what's 2023 been like for you this year?
So as I mentioned, new job, new location, it's a lot of change. But overall, I feel it's a lot of growth as well, and it's learning to adapt to new situations. But yeah, I mean, I've been blessed during the year.
Awesome. And what do you look forward to as the year kind of wraps up? It feels weird. It's like once we cross the halfway mark, it just like speeds up and like, geez,
Sure,
okay.
sure. Yeah, well, the busiest part of my season, like I mentioned, awaits me during football season. So starting in August or really starting next week when camp picks up,
Mhm.
injuries happen quickly. So I know that this is a time that I really have to be focused and prioritize and just keep things in order. But this is the time of the year that I love.
Gotcha. And what do you do to get yourself focused? Because it's like you're responsible for your personal family, you're responsible for your patients. Like, what do you do to take care of yourself first?
Yeah, so I try to have good daily routines of working out, doing affirmations, doing my Bible studies and things of that nature to keep me grounded
Mm.
and to keep me focused. Because if my mind is everywhere, then it's hard to be focused. And if you're not during busy seasons is the easiest time to let those things slip away.
Awesome. And how can people get in touch with you, or how can they follow your podcast and just continue to watch your journey unveil?
Sure. So, as mentioned here, Time Out with the Sports Doctor podcast is available on all different platforms. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook at Dr. Derrick, the Sports Doctor. I have a website, drderrickthesportsdoctor.com, where you can find all of my content, where you can actually connect with me via voicemail or sending me a message. But yeah, that's where I am. And, if you ever are in the same space, I'm always interested to meet people face to face, especially after having conversations like this.
Awesome. Oh, where are you located?
So I'm in right outside of Jackson, Mississippi.
Okay, nice. I guess, well, not to keep you long, and I was going to say, if you have any questions for me, feel free to ask. But with Jackson, Mississippi recently being highlighted, with Deion Sanders being there recently and him moving out to Colorado, have you seen a change in that area? Or is it
Well,
too
no.
soon to
So
tell, being recent to the area?
sure. So I feel, I'm the team physician for Jackson State University. So I had a front row seat with Coach Prime and Jackson State football.
Nice.
Coach T.C. Taylor was on that staff, and
Mm-hmm.
I feel that he's kept a lot of the momentum. But, he's a coach in waiting for a long period of time, and he
Mm-hmm.
is a coach, and he's doing a great job with the athletes now. So I don't expect a big letdown from the grade of football that people have learned to love from Jackson State. Jackson State has a rich culture in football. They put, I believe, 100 athletes into the NFL. And, at one time back in the late 70s and 80s, they were putting having multiple players drafted each year. So I feel that there's a rich culture. There was a lot of momentum gained in Jackson and at Jackson State during the Coach Prime era, but I continue to see that even now during the coaching change.
That's awesome to hear. I really like to hear that, because it's people, I guess I've learned how to tune out the noise, so to speak, or like the volume of what people say online, because it's like a big move happens or something and people go automatically to the negative because it's the more attractive thing. But it's good to see that with what was started, it continues to evolve, and there's a kindling of the flames there that's continuing to burn.
Yeah, I mean, and truly, that's the nature of college sports. I mean, it's very rare that athletes are going to be recruited by and play for the same coach throughout their career. Many times they might have multiple coaches during a career.
Mm.
So I feel like that's where we are now in college sports. So it's not something that's isolated to this situation. This is something that's happening across the sports realm.
Awesome. I like it. Do you have any questions for me?
No, not really.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much for your time. And I'd like to ask you this last question from the
Okay.
first question that I asked you. Are you still who you said you were?
From the first question of the beginning of the interview, yeah,
Mhm.
I believe so. I feel the same way.
Awesome. I like it. Thank you very much, Dr. Burgess. Pleasure to have this interview with you.
Hey, thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome.